The bill before the House aims to do three things. It aims to reduce the Leader's Allowance by 10%, to introduce auditing and vouching of the Leader's Allowance, and to abolish severance payments for ministers. I support all three of these aims. The Leader's Allowance should be reduced. It should be subject to auditing, and all expenditure should be vouched. And severance payments to ministers should be abolished. It's unclear why, Minister, it's taken 3 years to bring this bill before the House, but I have a sneaky suspicion that it might be because certain backbench government TDs do enjoy heckling independent TDs about the Leader's Allowance. But of course, what most of them probably don't know is that this government has voted against reducing and vouching the Leader's Allowance twice. It voted against it in the Seanad when an amendment was tabled by independent senators, and it voted against it again at committee when Deputy Catherine Murphy and I tabled an amendment to reduce it and to vouch it. Now, the problem for me, Minister, while I welcome what the bill is doing, is that I think it's unambitious. Why a reduction of only 10%? Why a reduction to only the Leader's Allowance? Why still quite limited transparency on how public funding of politics is spent? And why not fix the situation where party leaders continue to be paid handsomely for TDs who've either left or been kicked out of their parties? The Leader's Allowance is a problem, and I believe this bill goes some way to fixing it, but it's far from the only problem. The truth is that political funding in Ireland is funding for the parties, by the parties, and because of the parties. So let's look at the numbers. There are three sources of political funding in Irish politics. There's exchequer funding, there's the Leader's Allowance, and there's additional party staff. But the total funding for all parties and politicians after this bill is passed will be just under 16 million per annum. So how does this break down? Fine Gael will get 34% of this at 5.4 million. Fianna Fáil will get 23% at 3.5 million. Labour will get 22% at 3.4 million. Sinn Féin will get 13% at 2.1 million. And independent and non-party TDs, who are far greater in number than either Fianna Fáil or Sinn Féin, will get about €850,000. Now, once this bill is passed, the average funding per TD in Dáil Éireann will be €84,000 per year. Now, that's the average, 84,000. Independent TDs will get 37,000, so about half the average. €65,000 will be provided for each Fine Gael TD. €80,000 will be provided for each Labour TD. €140,000 will be provided for each Sinn Féin TD. And Micheál Martin will get €166,000 for each Fianna Fáil TD. So in spite of all the talk about the independents' Leader's Allowance, the reality is that public funding for independent TDs is a small fraction of what it is for party TDs. So here's what we have. Even though the government has the full, even though the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have the full resources of the government and the public sector at their disposal, An Taoiseach Enda Kenny will get 3/4 more per Fine Gael TD than independent TDs get. An Taoiseach Eamon Gilmore will get over twice per TD what independent TDs get. In opposition, Jerry Adams will get over 4 times per Sinn Féin TD what is provided to independent TDs. And Micheál Martin, as leader of Fine Gael, or leader of Fianna Fáil, I beg your pardon, will get 4.5 times per Fianna Fáil TD what is provided to independent TDs. Now, this government reminds us ad nauseum that Fianna Fáil destroyed this country, but it stands over giving that party 4.5 times per Fianna Fáil TD what is provided to independent TDs. Now, why is that? I don't think it's because you think they're worth it, Minister. Now, how is this democratic? How is this healthy? How is it a fair and proper allocation of funding to members of Dáil Éireann? Now, what we tend to hear is that it costs money to run a party. Therefore, Micheál Martin should get 4.5 times, over €160,000, what is provided to independent TDs. And in committee, when we've asked about this, well, what is this for? We're told it's for research. We're told it's for policy development. We're told it's for training. We're told it's for administration. Well, independent TDs carry out all those functions too. And yet we're asked to do it for 4.5 times less than Micheál Martin is asked to do it, without any of the economies of scale which parties get. And let's not forget that this funding goes to the parties and stays with the parties even when members of those parties leave or are expelled. Now, I've run the numbers on the Labour TDs and the Fine Gael TDs and senators who have left or been expelled from their parties. And it turns out that An Tánaiste Eamon Gilmore and An Taoiseach Enda Kenny will get about 2.2 million over the course of this Dáil for TDs that are not in their parties. It's easy money. I'd say there's lots of businesses out there who'd love to know how they can get 2 million from the Exchequer for staff that they've had to let go. Now, Minister, in your speech earlier on, you addressed this, and what you said was the following. It's been suggested that in the event that a member of a party loses the party whip, that the parliamentary party should have its funding reduced. It has been suggested. Deputy Murphy, myself and many others have suggested exactly that. You go on to say, not only does this suggestion miss the point, i.e. that the money given to the party, reflecting the wishes of the electorate, is not the individuals and was never theirs to control or spend in any fashion. Minister, you and I have debated this before and we have fundamentally different views on it. But I would put it to you again. The electorate doesn't vote for parties. There's no box for Labour. There's no box for Fine Gael. The electorate elects people. That's what it does. And if the people it elects are kicked out of those parties, or if the people it elects choose to leave those parties, those elected members of Dáil Éireann still have political functions in terms of research, in terms of training, in terms of all the things that independent TDs have to do, and in terms of all the things that the parties have to do. To me, it is preposterous to say to the voting public, when you vote, be very aware you are not voting for this person, you are voting for their party. And if this person, for example, makes a stand and defends an election promise we made, but we change our mind and kick them out, we will keep their funding. That is a preposterous thing. I don't believe there is any member of the voting public who would say, I absolutely agree, I am not voting for this person, I am voting for this party, therefore it doesn't matter who the person is. So, Minister, you and I have debated this before. I know I'm not going to change your mind, but I want to put it on the record that I fundamentally disagree. And point out, as you know, that the Constitution doesn't mention political parties. It mentions members of the Oireachtas. This bill only reduces the leader's allowance. And that's the only source of political funding that independent TDs have. Parties have 3 sources of funding, as I have laid out, 2 of which have been completely ignored by this bill. Now, whilst I agree that the leader's allowance should be reduced, I have tabled amendments before to have it reduced. The other sources of funding should be reduced as well, for 2 reasons. First of all, it will save the Exchequer money at a time when there's very little public money available. And secondly, by reducing only the funding available to non-party TDs, you have increased the disparity in what party leaders get for each of their TDs and what independent TDs get. So, questions you might address in your summing up, Minister. Why isn't total political funding being reduced by 10%? Why is Exchequer funding not being reduced? Why is Oireachtas resource to parties not being reduced? Why is it only leaders' allowance that's being reduced? Why is it only being reduced by 10%? Could we not go further? Could we not make it 15%, 20%? And why is it that ex-party TDs are not going to be given funding? I'll tell you why I think it is. I think it is because this bill is a sop. Because it's like a lot of other so-called political reform. It's pretend reform. Because it's political expedient, it's cynical, and it's box-ticking. Now, in spite of all of that, I'm going to vote for the bill because it goes a tiny fraction of the way that I think we need to go in upgrading political funding. But if this is the only real change we're going to see in political funding from now on, Minister, I'd say that that's very disappointing. This bill serves to protect and strengthen the existing political cartel. In its lack of ambition, it has failed to create a fair, transparent, cost-effective and fundamentally more democratic funding of politics in Ireland. And maybe, Minister, though I doubt it, but maybe you'll take some of those points on board and bring them as amendments to committee. Thank you.